Welcome to our conversation about redistricting. I'm Elaine Manley. I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of Cupertino and Sunnyvale. I'll be the moderator for this evening's event. A couple of quick technical points. We are using Zoom meeting rather than Zoom webinar. And so we would appreciate it if you don't mind keeping your video and mics turned off. That'll help make the recording go smoother. We are going to record this and make it available to others, and we'll get that link out to you so you can share it with your friends. When it gets to the point where you want to ask questions, if you could please type those into the chat box. Marie-Anne is going to be monitoring that, and we'll do our very best to answer or to ask your questions and get Jonathan to answer them. And so let's see here. I think we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. Thank you so much for understanding. We're delighted to have Jonathan Meta-Stein with us tonight. And he is an incredibly knowledgeable speaker on this topic, and he's just a wonderful speaker to listen to. So I think you're really going to enjoy this. I want to tell you a little bit about him. Jonathan is a civil rights attorney and a longtime democracy reform advocate, and he's the executive director of California Common Cause. Jonathan spent 4 years as the head of the Voting Rights and Census program at the Asian Law Caucus, where he worked to increase access to California's democracy for historically disenfranchised communities. He also worked very closely with Sunnyvale on our redistricting or setting up our districts in the first place. Jonathan previously worked as a voting rights staff of the ACLU of California, and he was the chair of the Oakland Public Ethics Commission. Jonathan is originally from Cupertino, so we've got a neighbor in the house. And he's going to talk a little bit about the what, the why, and the how of redistricting. So Jonathan, welcome. I'm going to turn off my slides and let you take over and present away. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elaine. It is a real treat to be with all of you. I still have the 408 phone number that I got when I was in maybe college or in my early 20s. And so it's great to be with my community of folks. I am going to share my screen now. All right, so we're going to talk about redistricting today, as you already know. We're going to start from a very basic level about redistricting. Now, I'm guessing, since you're a member of the League of Women Voters, you are extremely engaged on redistricting and on your local democracy. And I'm going to give you the basics, in part because I can do it quickly, but in part because I think it's just interesting and it's a good refresher, and you may maybe learn a few things that you didn't know before. It's also useful because we're recording today and we can share with others who may be less engaged and less knowledgeable. Ordinarily, I would start with an explanation of who Common Cause is, but I'm guessing if you're a member of the League of Women Voters, you already know who we are. We are constant partners with the League of Women Voters at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. I'm proud to say that we have, at California Common Cause, worked on every major piece of voting rights reform and redistricting reform for over the last decade, and the League of Women Voters has been by our side. We've been working hand in hand the entire time, and so it is a real treat to be with the League. Okay, so let's see here. Great, we're going to cover what is redistricting, why is redistricting important in our communities, and then how can you create a fair, transparent, inclusive redistricting process. Now, let's talk first about why we redistrict. The United States Constitution requires that political districts of the same type, so all city council districts in a city or all board of supervisor districts in a county, have the same number of residents. This is called the principle of population equality. And the goal of population equality is to make sure that every legislator at any level of government represents the same number of people. If you want to be able to have same access to your city council members as anyone else in your city, or the same access to a state lawmaker as anyone else in your state. So in this instance, we have a city of 20 people. Let's say there are 4 council districts, 20 divided by 4. And so if you want population equality, which is required by the US Constitution, you need to have 5 people in every single district. Now, this is true at the city level, it's true at the county level, it's true for your school board, it's true for every single political jurisdiction that uses districts. So in this instance, we've drawn 4 districts and we have 5 people in each. We have population equality. But over time, people move. Children are born, people pass away, population shift to where maybe the cost of living is cheaper. We've seen that certainly in California over the last several years. And so what this means is that districts become uneven in size over the course of the decade. And so now you have two districts that are quite a bit larger than the other districts, and you need redistricting in order to re-achieve population equality. How do we know that we got to that point? We take the census, of course, right? So the reason why we have the census is to distribute federal resources in an equitable way, but also, actually more accurately, to distribute resources in a proportional way. I think it's probably a hard argument to claim that the US federal government distributes resources in an equitable way. But one of the other reasons why we take the census, of course, is to understand where people have moved. And so that we can draw new district lines. And so instead of using the same lines we had before, we've redrawn our district lines. And now we have, in a slightly larger city, populations where you have 6, 6, 6, and 6. All right, so that's why we have redistricting at the most fundamental level. We need to achieve population equality as populations shift and move. Now, for better or for worse, people have different political views, and those often track with other socioeconomic, racial, and ethnic characteristics. And so you have to do redistricting in a way that is conscious of power dynamics, it's conscious of representation, it's conscious of histories of discrimination. So bad redistricting can take community voting power away. So in this hypothetical city, you've got a minority population that is 4 members of the city out of 16. And if you were to carelessly draw district lines in really simple geographic shapes, you would have very simple looking districts, but you would have a minority community that is not more than 1/4 of any district and is going to be unable, in most cases, to achieve representation in any of these districts, and may be unable to have their voice heard by any representation, right? Or any representatives. This could be true. The minority party here, the minority group here, could be Black voters. They could be Democrats. They could be Republicans. They could be LGBT community members. It doesn't really matter what the minority group is. It depends on the city or the region or the state or whatever. But poorly drawn districts can dilute minority voting power. Now, you take the exact same city, you draw lines with a little bit more care, and all of a sudden you have one district out of the 4 in which that minority community is likely to be able to achieve representation. And now all of a sudden, this community, there's 4 out of 16 members of the community, so they are 1/4 of the population, will likely have representation in 1/4 of the seats on our city council, okay? So one of the goals of redistricting, or I guess maybe the most core function of redistricting, is to achieve population equality. But one of the really important goals of good redistricting done well, is to draw equitable districts that allow full representation and voice for all of our community members. Now, I am oversimplifying to some extent. There are all sorts of other factors in place when you draw district lines. There's the Federal Voting Rights Act, and there's a number of other criteria that are mandatory or discretionary. And during the question and answer, if people are really interested in getting into the nitty-gritty, I'm happy to do that. I'm also happy to talk about the Voting Rights Act in greater detail. But this is basically the idea. Bad redistricting can silence communities, and good redistricting can empower them. Now, in California, we were trying to, we made a bold decision. Over 10 years ago now, we decided to create the first in the nation independent citizen-run redistricting commission that prioritized transparency, that prioritized independence, and really put the community in the driver's seat. Now, why did we do this? We did it because of a long history of shenanigans around redistricting and gerrymandering in the state of California. So we didn't have extreme partisan gerrymandering or extreme racial gerrymandering. We did not have a state legislature controlled by, let's say, Democrats that decided it was going to pass redistricting maps that maximize Democratic Party control. And in part, that was because at the time, oftentimes we had Republican governors who wouldn't permit that to happen. So what did we have instead? Well, I'll take you back to the 2001 redistricting cycle. So the last redistricting cycle we had before we created the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. On September 12th, 2001, a day after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the California state legislature rushed through a vote to pass new district lines that essentially preserved a sweetheart deal between Democrats and Republicans. No one was paying attention, and they passed new district lines that essentially made it possible for everybody of either party to get reelected. They drew district lines that met basic legal requirements, but kept everyone's careers going, everyone's political careers going, and everybody in power. And we had very little turnover in our state legislature because the lines did exactly what they were supposed to do. They kept everybody in power. So that had all sorts of really horrible impacts on local communities. So here's an example. What town do we think this is? Now, you're not able to answer. Your video is off. You're muted. I understand. You might guess that it's Wisconsin, that it's Detroit, that it's somewhere in the coldest climates in the nation. And in fact, this is Watts. On November 12th of 2003, a freak storm dumped over 5 inches of rain and hail on the city of Watts in the Los Angeles area. It overwhelmed storm drains because Watts was not prepared for a massive hailstorm and led to flooding in the community. About 150 buildings and homes were lost or heavily damaged. 50,000 people lost power. 6,000 people sought aid from the county's emergency shelter. And firefighters rescued over 100 people. Many people had lost everything, but FEMA refused to act, and the governor of California at the time took 6 days to declare a state of emergency and direct aid to the city of Watts. Watts tried to get help, and they couldn't. Why? Because, well, for a number of reasons. One, the gerrymander of our political districts in 2001 split Watts, which is in green, into 3 congressional districts, okay? And the state Senate maps that were also a gerrymander split Watts into 3 state Senate districts. And what that meant was when crisis hit in Watts, the community didn't have anyone to go to. This is a quote from a former congressional staffer. He said, at the time of the 2003 flood, I remember our office was trying to be responsive, but there were a lot of ping-ponging constituents between elected representatives. Watts is cut into 3 different congressional and state Senate districts. Residents who live on the same street may live in different districts. There was a lot of unnecessary frustration for constituents during a difficult time. And here's the key quote: this would have never happened if all of Watts belonged in one district. Okay? So representation and responsiveness from our local government depends on good district lines that keeps communities together and enables them to speak with one voice. That was one of several examples of shenanigans that were required in order for the state legislature to draw district lines that essentially preserved everyone's political futures. This is an example of the Long Beach boot. It was drawn to keep a certain politician's house in Senate District 28. And as you can see, it led to all sorts of crazy distortions of districts in the area. And it cut Long Beach into 3 state Senate seats, and it split the Black community in the region. Okay, so you can find these all over the place. These were the sorts of distortions that were necessary in order to protect incumbents. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, surely this doesn't happen at the local level. In fact, it does. This was the product of the districting process in the city of Martinez in the Bay Area. There were a number of, I believe it was all 4 incumbents lived in the center part of town, sort of where this map is at its narrowest. And they knew if they drew honest, reliable districts, honest, authentic districts that actually honored communities and where they lived, if it kept this parts of town together that shared socioeconomic characteristics or shared racial or ethnic characteristics, or honored communities as they actually lived on the ground in Martinez, they would be grouped into the same district and they'd have to run against each other in order to get reelected. And so what did they do? They drew these long, skinny strips of districts that split the middle part of town into 4 different districts, allowing everybody to have their own district and continue to run unopposed or without having to challenge one of their colleagues in the future. And in the process of doing so, they split a Latino community in the southern part of the city and had to create all other sorts of other distortions along the way. So now that was a more recent example of a districting gerrymander or incumbency protection shenanigans. But these were populated throughout California's history. And in 2008, we finally were fed up, and an unusual coalition of advocates and allies decided to push for Prop 11. And here at the podium is Kathy Fung, my predecessor as the executive director of California Common Cause, and probably one of the people most responsible for the creation of California's independent redistricting revolution. She was co-author of the ballot initiative that created the Citizens Redistricting Commission. Behind her is a prominent supporter of the Independent Redistricting Commission at the time, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and behind them is a crew of folks turned out by the AARP, who were major supporters of the ballot initiative. This was the Citizens Redistricting Commission that we got. It was applauded at the time for being widely representative of California's diversity, not just in terms of its racial and ethnic diversity, but in terms of geographic diversity, gender diversity. It brought a wide range of skills and backgrounds to the coalition. You had some people who were a rancher or a bookstore owner. And then you had the man third from the left, who was a former head of the US Census Bureau. You had a wide range of experiences and talents, and they took their job incredibly seriously. They understood that they were the first of their kind in the nation and an experiment in democracy. In all, they held over 100 meetings. They met in 32 cities around the state of California, and they received input from more than 20,000 members of the community. Some of you may have gone to their hearings 10 years ago. At this point now, it might be, 10 years ago. But they were really fabulous experiences in lived democracy where the rubber hits the road. And they ended up drawing districts that really served the community well. So community leaders in the city of Watts came together, they united, they determined what was best for the city of Watts, and no surprise, they decided it was best to keep Watts together in a single congressional district. And so the district lines that were drawn by the California Citizens Redistricting Commission, which was highly responsive to citizen input, drew districts that undid the slicing and dicing of Watts and kept Watts together in a single congressional district. Okay? And shortly thereafter, the first Latina from this congressional district, the first ever Latina from this congressional district was elected to represent it in Congress. So the independent redistricting revolution that started with our state redistricting commission has extended across the nation and here at home. So a number of states, in red states and in blue states, have adopted independent redistricting commissions that mimic California's Citizens Redistricting Commission. But also, we have seen a spread of redistricting commissions here in California. So the map you see are the cities that have adopted independent cities and counties, a partial list actually of cities and counties that have adopted independent redistricting commissions. And I'm going to spend a few minutes now talking about independent redistricting commissions, advisory redistricting commissions, and hybrid redistricting commissions. Okay. So an independent redistricting commission is the goal, or is the best practice, excuse me, if your goal is to have zero politicalization of the process. There is an inherent conflict of interest in allowing elected officials to draw their own districts. If you want to eliminate that conflict of interest, if you want the voters to choose their politicians and not for the politicians to choose their voters, an independent redistricting commission is the way to go. In an independent redistricting commission, the commission is appointed by a trusted third-party entity. That might be your city's ethics commission, if it has one. It might be a specific other commission, like a charter review commission, if your city has one. It might be your county registrar of voters. It might be a panel of retired judges. In some cities, actually, I believe in Oakland, they have it's a 3-person panel that does the selecting. One is a professor from a local public policy school. One is a member of the League of Women Voters, and one is a member of city staff. I forget, but the League of Women Voters is actually a part of the selection process because it's a trusted third-party entity. Currently, the County of San Mateo is trying to figure out what kind of redistricting commission they want to use, and we're going to get to other kinds of redistricting commissions in just a moment. And they're actually contemplating having the League of Women Voters in San Mateo County evaluate applicants and do the selecting, because the league is trusted as an unbiased third party that everyone can believe in. Okay. The other qualifications, or the other, characteristics of an independent redistricting commission, there are in state law specific disqualifying conflict of interest criteria. So if you were a lobbyist, if you held a public office, if you were on the city council, for example, or you worked for the local Democratic Party, or a handful of other criteria, you are disqualified, because we want to depoliticize the process and make sure that no one is going to be serving on an independent redistricting commission in order to benefit one political party or the other, or benefit an incumbent, or further their own political careers. Another criteria here is that you are banned from doing certain things after serving on an independent redistricting commission. For example, you cannot run for office under the district lines that you drew The rationale being it would be a conflict of interest, but more than that, it would really mar the perception of the maps. It would look like you served on the independent redistricting commission so you could draw a map that served you well in your future run for elected office. So there are conflicts of interest criteria on the front end to make sure that the process is not politicized, and there are post-service restrictions to make sure that trust in the process is maintained. The final characteristic about an independent redistricting commission that is really important to note, and this is probably the single most important thing, an independent redistricting commission has the power to adopt the maps, okay? So an independent commission would lead a very public process. It would hear from the community. It would gather redistricting data from the Census Bureau. It would synthesize all this community input and testimony with data. It would do a legal analysis around the Federal Voting Rights Act and other redistricting criteria. It would then draw draft maps. It would then publish them and get feedback from the community about those draft maps. And then at the end of the day, it would have the final say on which map is selected, okay? That is a contrast. Oh, sorry. These are the cities and counties that have adopted independent redistricting commissions. And we are currently at California Common Cause and in partnership with the League of Women Voters and a number of other partners statewide, monitoring and watchdogging the processes and trying to support these independent commissions to make sure things go well. Now, the characteristics of an independent redistricting commission that I just mentioned contrast with an advisory redistricting commission. Here, in an advisory commission, members are typically appointed by sitting incumbents. So the city council gets to appoint their preferred people on the city's redistricting commission. This is true, for example, in the city of San Jose, the city of Los Angeles. So if they want to appoint someone who, and there's very few disqualifying conflicts of interest criteria. So if they want to appoint someone who's very close to them, who has supported their campaigns in the past, who is a benefactor of theirs or a mentor of theirs or a protege of theirs or whatever the case may be, they can do that. And there are some really disconcerting examples from 10 years ago where people were appointed on to advisory redistricting commissions and they're clearly just mouthpieces for the elected official who appointed them. They lead the advisory redistricting commissions, lead a public process. They hold meetings, they engage the community, they take testimony, they synthesize that with the redistricting data, they draw draft maps, they then take more input on those draft maps, they then finalize a map, and they send it to the governing board of the jurisdiction, be it a city council or a county board of supervisors. And that governing board can do whatever they want. They can adopt the map, they can modify the map, they can toss the map in the garbage, and they can draw their own map. My understanding is that 10 years ago, this is what the Santa Clara County Advisory Redistricting Commission did. They had an advisory redistricting commission. They went through the whole process. They sent their map to the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors said, forget this, threw it in the garbage, and drew their own map. Okay. So advisory redistricting commissions, some might argue, are better than nothing, but they may also create the illusion of a public process while still concentrating power and control in the hands of self-interested incumbents. Now, you're not going to be, you won't be surprised to know that cities and counties are much more likely to adopt an advisory commission than they are to adopt a independent commission. And so there's a long list of cities and counties that have advisory redistricting commissions. And I have Sunnyvale here, and I actually realize now that's an error. The Sunnyvale Redistricting Commission, which is coming into, oh, excuse me, what is happening here? Oh my. The Sunnyvale Redistricting Commission that is coming into being literally, this week or tomorrow, I believe, is the final vote, is actually somewhere in between an advisory redistricting commission and a hybrid redistricting commission. Okay, so the third of the three kinds. They're sort of a blend. They typically allow a unbiased third party to do the selecting of commissioners, but that's not actually required. There are specific disqualifying conflict of interest criteria. The way a hybrid commission works is that they send two or more maps to the governing body, and the governing body has to choose one to adopt without modification. The Sunnyvale approach, which we can talk more about in question and answer, and Elaine, frankly, can speak to it more definitively than I can. The Sunnyvale approach is, in all likelihood, going to have a process in which the commission and the council will kind of ping maps back and forth at the end of the process so that both parties have some input and say. And then ultimately, I believe the commission will have the ability to make the final choice. But Elaine can comment more thoroughly in question and answer. There is a relatively small list of cities that have used the hybrid approach, 2 in San Diego County and 2 in the Central Valley. Okay, so I want to just spend a few minutes here talking about the best practices for local redistricting commissions, and really we can talk more about, we will talk more about best practices for or how do we get engaged in a redistricting process that does not use a commission. But the Bay Area is kind of a hotbed for redistricting commissions, with advisory, hybrid, and independent commissions popping up now all over the place. And redistricting commissions are being considered by the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, by the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, and by a number of cities in the area. And so I just want to spend some time focusing on this. And also, this is sort of the vanguard of policymaking in the field. First, commissioners should be qualified, diverse, and impartial. Okay, it's really important to get good people. And they should be selected in an open, accessible, and inclusive process. And we have a ton of advice on how to do this on a really granular level. But like, for example, a number of cities in their initial application processes had like 40-page paper-based applications. And it was a real barrier to getting applications. And one of the things that they made people do was fill out what's called a Form 700, which is a financial conflict of interest form that is fairly intrusive and very detailed. And so applicants would see that in the application packet and say, forget this, I don't want to do this. And it turns out it's much more effective if you withhold that. And then as you get more applicants on the front end, because people are intimidated of this giant financial disclosure form, and then later in the process, you ask a small number of finalists to fill out the Form 700. By that time, they're more invested in the process, and you're burdening a smaller number of people with these sorts of financial disclosures. There are lots of different recommendations that we would have on how to build an open, accessible, inclusive process. And that's important if you want a robust applicant pool. Okay, and a trustworthy application process and selection process. Additionally, residents should be engaged and educated in the process. If you are on this Zoom call this evening, you are probably a democracy super warrior. You are in the top 1% of most engaged people in this state and in this country. For most people, redistricting is an esoteric, complicated, wonky topic that doesn't make any intuitive sense. And what we want to do in order to lead a good process is to get beyond you and me, get beyond the people that are always engaged in our federal politics, our state politics, and our local politics, and bring in the communities who are not engaged at any level, and certainly not engaged at the local level. There are, as you probably know, if you go to city council meetings, there's a group of 10 or 20 or 50. In some cities, maybe it's 100 people who are at every city council meeting. They're at every planning commission meeting. Maybe they're also going to the board of supervisors meetings. They're going to school board meetings. If you don't interrupt the process, if you don't do something unique and maybe disruptive, I mean that word in a constructive sense, you will get those folks making their voices heard in your local redistricting process. And you have to do better than that. We have to do better than that. We have to bring in the communities that historically aren't showing up to city council meetings and aren't engaged, because their voices matter just as much as anyone else's in the redistricting process. And then lastly, you want to make sure that community testimony is prioritized. If you're going to do the work of educating folks and bringing them out to these hearings to make their voices heard, we want to make sure that their voices are honored and that the maps that are ultimately drawn prioritize their views, and you get fair, honest maps that really reflect the community on the ground and allow for fair representation of all of our communities in government. Now, I said a second ago that I would talk about how to get involved if you don't have a commission. And here, I would really, so first of all, you need to make your voice, you need to get educated, you need to get engaged, you need to make your voice heard, and you need to engage your neighbors so that you're not getting the usual suspects in the process. That's true if your city council or your county board of supervisors is drawing their own districts just as much as it is if there's an independent commission. Now, we've created a set of resources that will serve you well, regardless of whether you have a commission or not. And in fact, actually, so that's at commoncause.org/local redistricting 2021. I also know that the League of Women Voters has a very good local guide that made at the state level that you may already have in your email, or your leadership may be able to distribute, okay? But in terms of, and you'll find resources there now, but you'll find even more resources over the course of the next several months. One thing you'll find there, for example, is a guide to all the legal requirements and a guide to the best practices. So it's one document. We've done a lot of work to format it, make it readable and accessible. The legal requirements are marked by a check mark, and the best practices are marked by a star. And so you'll be able to see, what does my city or my county or my school board have to do? Actually, let me take that back. School boards have like no rules, basically. School boards and special districts have almost no rules in the redistricting process. And in the next few weeks, we'll have a document, a resource up on this website that articulates what very little law governs school board and special district redistricting. But the document I was referring to a moment ago articulates what are the legal requirements for a city or county redistricting, and what are the best practices for a city or county redistricting. And I think that will be very useful to you. Okay, I want to talk a little bit now about the laws that are in place, because we worked really hard to pass new law. Common Cause was in the lead. The League of Women Voters supported the bill. A number of our civil rights partners supported the bill. It should create better, more transparent, more honest, more community-centered redistricting this year and next. So that was AB 849. It was passed in 2019. The first thing it does is it standardizes and ranks redistricting criteria. It says that, for example, honoring communities and keeping them whole, not slicing and dicing them in the way that happened to Watts, that's one of the top criteria. And it requires cities and counties to consider a range of criteria in a ranked order, as opposed to letting them basically run wild. Prior to AB 849, redistricting at the local level was the wild, wild west. So this brought some structure and some order and some really fair rules. It does require the districts to be compact and contiguous, okay? So you can't get crazy gerrymandered shapes. It requires the communities of interest be kept together, as I mentioned a moment ago. It prohibits, by law, it prohibits partisan gerrymandering. It requires a minimum of 4 public hearings for community input. The previous requirement was 1. And we, by the way, we argued for more, but the institutional powers in Sacramento pushed back and got it knocked down to just 4. It requires that maps be posted for the public to view before they're approved. And it requires community education and outreach and publicity on the behalf of cities and counties. So they have to go out and reach community groups, and they have to go and reach local media sources, including ethnic media sources, and they have to do some basic translation of their materials, okay? So our hope is that this will generate the fairest, most inclusive, and most community-centered local redistricting cycle that California has ever had. And as I said a moment ago, the resource that we have here, what we call our roadmap document at this URL, articulates all of these requirements and more. Now, I know people are keenly interested in questions of timeline. The Census Bureau seems to put out a statement every few months saying that redistricting data will be delayed further. So what does that mean for our timeline? The new Citizens Redistricting Commission is already underway. It was seated last year. It has been meeting very, very regularly. Right now, it is just holding business meetings. And what I mean by business meetings are startup meetings. They're hiring legal counsel. They're hiring a demographer. They're hiring communication staff. They're outlining an outreach plan. They are developing how they're going to handle language access and translation for different communities throughout the process. Up next will be public education and outreach. So probably starting next month, they've done a little bit of this already, but starting next month, I think they will be doing a variety of hearings, presentations to community groups. So if you, for example, want to hear from a member of the Citizens Redistricting Commission, they have an outreach manager who you can email, and they have a speaker request form on their website. And you can get someone to come and speak to you from the commission, the 14-member commission. And then after they've done a couple months of public education outreach, they're going to be holding community of interest input hearings. So what that means is they're going to be, I mentioned previously that the last commission held over 100 meetings in, I think it was 32 cities. They're going to be going, now this will be over Zoom, but they'll be doing dedicated meetings for different cities and counties and regions all over California, where they will be hearing from community members on what they want their district lines to look like. And so, for example, it might be, in Cupertino, parents might come forward and say, we want everyone who sends their kids to a Cupertino Union School District school to be in the same state assembly and state senate district, because we think that our parent groups are a community of interest. We want to be kept together. We want to be able to organize and speak with one voice to our state legislative representation. Or you might think to yourself, these suburban areas are similar in character and history and socioeconomic status and they're distinct from some of these other areas in different parts of the South Bay, and we want those communities to be kept together in our congressional districts, our state senate districts, and our state assembly districts, or something to that effect. So that will be your opportunity to give testimony of that kind. Census data itself was originally supposed to be available in the spring. Then it was delayed to July. And just recently it was delayed again, with the Census Bureau saying it may be available as late as September 31st of 2021. What does that mean? It means a number of things. The first thing it means is that we're going to have just more time to do community of interest hearings, which is a good thing. I mean, it will be more time for education. It'll be more time for community of interest hearings. Those are good things. it does mean that the Redistricting Commission is going to probably have to really rush at the last stages of this. They're going to get all this community of input testimony, and then very late in the process, they're going to get the redistricting data, and they're going to have a very short period of time in which they synthesize those things, do the legal analyses that are required, and come up with draft maps and then final maps. The redistricting deadline for the state level, and by the state level, I mean the State Redistricting Commission, who, remember, draws the state maps and the congressional maps, okay? The deadline was December 15th, sorry, the original deadline was August of 2021. We knew they were never going to be able to do that. And now the Census Bureau was saying that the redistricting data is not going to be available until after that date anyway. We worked with the state legislature to petition the state Supreme Court to essentially override this deadline in state constitution. And they moved that August deadline to December 15th of 2021. One thing they said was that if the Census Bureau delays redistricting data further, the Citizens Redistricting Commission is permitted to go past that December 15th deadline. And so now the Citizens Redistricting Commission, where everything right now is a little bit under flux with respect to timeline. Everyone is still sort of reeling from these announcements from the Census Bureau that data will be coming out as late as September 31st. But it looks like they may take until January 31st in order to complete their process, okay? Which is going to make things very challenging in terms of preparing for the June primary, because we're going to have a very crunched end to our redistricting process, and then we're going to have a very crunched primary campaign season. Now, what does the local timeline look like? Here are the deadlines for local redistricting in state law. If your jurisdiction uses the 2022 primary election, which is currently scheduled for June 2022, your redistricting deadline is December 15th. If you do not use the primary and your next election is the 2022 general election in November, your redistricting deadline is April 17th of 2022. That first date, December 15th, will be a challenge, given how late redistricting data is going to be available. That second date, April 17th, should be fine. We're thinking that there is going to be legislation introduced in the state legislature that moves that December 15th deadline to give cities and counties a little bit more time to complete the redistricting process. But if you extend that much further, then you're cutting into the elections calendar for the primary, and it gets real tight real quick. And so we're thinking maybe the primary election gets pushed back, but if that happens, it can only get pushed back by maybe a couple weeks at most, in order to allow enough time for elections officials to certify the count in the primary election and then begin the process of preparing for the November general election. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room here. Things are going to get very compact, and we have a lot of people who are thinking about timeline issues basically every single day at the state level. Now, it's important to remember that jurisdictions should begin the process much, much earlier than that point at which the Census Bureau releases redistricting data. If you start on September 31st, when redistricting data becomes available, you're too late. Jurisdictions should begin staffing up now, and they can start hearing from the community long before that data becomes available. They can start doing it in June, July, August. And if you want an independent commission or any kind of commission in your city or county, you need to be acting now. Sunnyvale is making a decision on its commission potentially tomorrow. San Mateo County is considering it now. Santa Clara County is considering it now. San Jose's Advisory Redistricting Commission is already seated. And a number of other jurisdictions are basically making a decision now. Well, I should be more careful. A number of jurisdictions have already seated their redistricting commissions. A number of additional jurisdictions are considering it now. And particularly if you use the 2022 primary, you kind of have to make a decision in the next month or so. So some of us are visual learners, and PowerPoint slides can be boring. And so I just want to say that there's sort of, this is the process. This is how things stack up, in my view. The first is you want to center community input. You want the community to drive. This is how good redistricting works. You want community to drive the process. You want community voices about what district lines should look like to be in the driver's seat. You want to also create a transparent, trustworthy, inclusive process that makes people feel Like they want to participate and it's worth participating. You want to create a process in which people think to themselves, I trust this process and I trust the people leading it. And then the outcome, ideally, after you've centered community input and after you created a transparent and inclusive process, is equitable, fair district maps that allow for good representation. And this is just a couple images from the city of Sunnyvale's districting process, which I want to give the city of Sunnyvale enormous credit. When they were threatened with the California Voting Rights Act lawsuit, and we could talk more about that if you're interested, they decided they were going to lead a very public process to draw district lines for the very first time. And they held a number of meetings, more than was required by law. They made those meetings inclusive, and they had a number of pop-ups at a variety of community events. And it is kind of crazy to me to see people just gathering in the community and not wearing masks. It's like from another era in human history or something. But these are city staff. Jackie Guzman is the woman on the right, who are leading community members through a relatively complicated process with care, earnestness, compassion, patience, I really want to commend the city of Sunnyvale for the process it undertook. And now there's a group of community leaders who are urging Sunnyvale, after modeling best practices for its districting process, to model best practices for its redistricting process by establishing a commission. Okay, we have a redistricting email address. So if you're ever interested in asking a question, first and foremost, you have your local league to contact, and they are so spectacular. So they can probably get you answers. But if you do want to reach out to the Common Cause team, you can reach us at redistrictingca@commoncause.org. I want to thank everybody for your time, and I am more than happy to answer questions. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. That was outstanding. And we do want to have some time for questions. So if you'll please stay with us for this. We had a couple of questions submitted in advance, but if you would like to ask a question, please type it into the chat. Marie Ann will be watching that and help us make sure we do our best to get all of your questions answered. So one of the questions that was submitted in advance, Jonathan, is talking about what's going on at the state level. Multiple states are expecting court fights over redistricting. Are there any threats on the horizon in California?
Less so than other states. The Citizens Redistricting Commission is very conscientious and careful. They're likely to hire 2 sets of legal counsel, one to advise them on all legal matters and one specifically to advise them on compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. And so if they are really thoughtful, and I think they will be, it minimizes the chances of litigation very substantially. Now there will almost inevitably be someone who is frustrated with the map because it makes their political career or future harder, or makes them think that their party can't elect as many people in a region that they care about, and they may bring some sort of litigation. I mean, it's probably quite likely, but is legitimate litigation likely? I think that's much less so, and I think that the odds of it in other states are much higher.
Okay, good. And then another question that was submitted in advance, they were talking about the Supreme Court struck down the Voting Rights Act process whereby legislative maps had to be run by the U.S. Department of Justice before being finalized. What is the threat to fair redistricting in those states now that those limits are gone?
Right, it's a great question. So we're talking about the Shelby County v. Holder decision from 2013. Which struck down sections 4 and 5 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, also known as pre-clearance. It covered a certain set of states and a couple counties in which basically those states, those jurisdictions, had to submit any voting change, including redistricting maps, to either the Department of Justice or a DC Circuit Court. And what they had to show was essentially that their change made minority communities, minority voters, no worse off than they already were. And so I don't know if you want to count that as a particularly high bar, but that was the standard. It was called non-retrogression. And yeah, those protections are gone because the Supreme Court under Chief Justice John Roberts has historically been very hostile to voting rights. And those states can essentially do what they want. It was also the case that we thought the Supreme Court might do something meaningful about partisan gerrymandering. Under the issue of partisan gerrymandering had come before the Supreme Court over and over and over. And the Supreme Court had always said, we can't find a good metric to determine how to measure partisan gerrymandering. And we can't find a standard to tell us how much partisan gerrymandering is too much partisan gerrymandering. Now, you and I might say to ourselves, Elaine, any partisan gerrymandering is too much partisan gerrymandering. But the Supreme Court was of the view that, a certain amount of politics and shenanigans and partisan gerrymandering, that's just part of the process and it's sort of acceptable. And so what we really want to police is extreme partisan gerrymandering. And what is the line between what's acceptable and standard, and on the other hand, what's extreme and unacceptable? And they could never do it. They could never decide. And we got really close. Common Cause led the lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court. We brought lawsuits against Democratic gerrymanders and Republican gerrymanders in the same lawsuit so that we could really show the Supreme Court that both parties did this. And then in the end, with a new Supreme Court, I believe it was after Anthony Kennedy retired and Kavanaugh took his seat, the Supreme Court said definitively it would not attempt to police partisan gerrymandering. It was impossible in the views of the court. And so the federal courts are not able to police partisan gerrymandering in any way. In California, we are prohibited from doing it. I mean, it's like we're just legions ahead of the federal law. But in these other states, partisan gerrymandering is permissible. And so, we could see really intense gerrymandering over the course of the next year to 18 months.
Interesting. How many cities throughout California did you say are going through the redistricting process right now?
It's hard to know because so many cities have converted to district elections in the last few years, Elaine, but there are 482 cities in California, and our best guess is somewhere between 100 and 200 use district elections.
Okay.
And all of them have to redistrict.
Good. Yeah. And so, for example, Cupertino doesn't have to, but as you were mentioning, Sunnyvale does. And our league has been very active working with council. And so we'll be presenting tomorrow night to encourage them, as you mentioned, to pass a commission. We don't know if it's going to pass tomorrow, but it will get a lot of the details sorted through. And it does look like there will be a commission for sure. And like you said, it's kind of a between the advisory and the hybrid. But at least we have a collaborative group working together, and council is engaged and the community is engaged, and we're coming together with a good solution for our city. So we'll be active no matter what to make sure it's done well. So good to have a good group to work with.
And Elaine, let me just note that there is a recommendation from a Santa Clara County commission. It's like the Commission on Elections. I forget the exact name. It recommended to the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors that they adopt an independent commission. And the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors then asked their staff for an analysis. That analysis will probably go back to the Board of Supervisors in March, early March. So if the league is interested in getting engaged on the county level, I think they're gonna have an opportunity to do so in the next several weeks to a month.
Great, I've made a note of that. That's definitely something we should look into. Excellent. So I'm looking to see, are there any other questions? Marianne, is there anybody that's got a question that we need to check on?
Yeah, we have a couple from our audience. Diane is asking, who organizes and hosts the community of interest hearings, typically?
Sure. So at the state level, the commission does it themselves. They have staff funded by the state legislature, and they set up the meetings themselves. At the city or county level, it's typically city staff or county staff. And the people there who are actually hearing, the people who are actually there listening depend. It would be your city council if your city council is in charge of the process, or it would be your redistricting commission if the redistricting commission is in charge of the process. But in either case, the people actually handling the logistics are likely to be city staff or county staff.
Okay. And also, how does one contact members of the state commission to come and speak with their community?
Sure. So let me just note here. Let me pull up their new website. Let me see if I can do this while we're talking. They have their website. They have a great website, and on it you can find a speakers list. I would recommend that you go to, I believe it's We Draw the Lines. Oh heavens! The problem is that I'm at their website and it does not look like their new version. So I'm wondering if maybe I'm missing their new URL. But the URL that I have is wedrawthelines.ca.gov. And you can sign up for their email list. You can sign up for updates. And there's a speaker request form. And you can fill out the speaker request form. And somebody on their outreach team will get back to you. And I have a link to the speaker request form, and I can send it to Elaine, and she can distribute it to the local league if you're interested.
That would be great. Please do.
I'm putting that also in the chat. Thank you.
Any other questions, Marianne?
I do not have any more right now.
Okay, great. Then what I wanted to do, Jonathan, if you'll stand for just a moment longer, I wanted to share a couple of my slides here, and then we'll wrap up. So the question becomes, so what can you do to participate in this? And so if you live in Sunnyvale in particular, we want you to contact the city council and urge for a diverse commission. And you're welcome to email me. Just go to lwvcs.org and contact us and send an email, and we can get you connected and coordinate that activity. Secondly, once Sunnyvale creates the commission, they're going to develop the application, and that should be launched in March. If that's something of interest to you, apply to be a commissioner. That's a great way to learn a lot about the city, as well as give tremendous input on a very important process. And then third, encourage your neighbors, and of course, get yourself to get educated and participate in these maps. As Jonathan said, a big part of this is understanding all the different communities of interest and how do we balance the population in the communities of interest. We've got very good maps, at least in Sunnyvale. But even those lines will have to be revisited once they get the population change from 2010 to 2020. So there's a lot to do, and we definitely would like you to be active and engaged. And so a couple of resources that we wanted to share was the localredistricting.org. This is a website that Jonathan's team and Common Cause has put a tremendous amount of time into. And it gives you a lot of best practices. You can learn a lot about what's going on around the state. You can even pretend to write your own ordinance, which we took an attempt at. And actually, it was a very good process to learn more about redistricting and the thoughts that you have to think through and all of the details. Sunnyvale's website for learning about their process by the city, they have sunnyvale.ca.gov/government/redistricting, and you can sign up to be part of their update email list. And then of course, lwvcs.org, League of Women Voters, Cupertino, Sunnyvale. So lwvcs.org, our website, we will be posting a lot of things in the calendar as well as educational information. So I just want to pause here and thank Jonathan. That was such a great thing. We really need people to be engaged. We need you to participate. Like Jonathan said, it needs to be new people. It needs to make sure that we're representing those communities of interest and they're actively engaged. And so if everybody reaches out, I think it'll be like it says here, a great example of effective community engagement and democracy at work. It's a great thing when democracy works well. So thank you again, Jonathan. Thank you to my fellow league members. Thank you for attending this. We do appreciate you taking the time. And once again, check out those websites. This will be posted online. We'll put it at lwvcs.org with a link so that you can send it to your friends and watch it again if you need to. That was full of facts and information. So thank you again and good night.